Hello, members. This is Marcus James. I'm Manager of Office and Administrative Services here at ACA, and I welcome you to this edition of the ACA Member Webinar Series. A couple of administrative notes before we begin. Attendees are in listen-only mode, and that means that we would like you please to put your questions in the questions dialog box, and our presenters will answer those towards the end of the webinar. There's also a brief survey at the end, and we would appreciate your feedback. As we advance the slides, you may notice a lag in your local view, and this will be depending on your bandwidth. Your slides will catch up, but if we do have an issue on our end, we will definitely let you know about that and we'll adjust accordingly. And now I'm going to hand this over to ACA's Vice President of Government Affairs, Heidi McAuliffe.
Thank you, Marcus. We're really pleased to have with us today Bob Kramer, a director with the ChemQuest Group who supports clients in the firm operational and manufacturing efficiencies business pillar. Bob joined ChemQuest in 2022, following a 40-year career in the polymer converting industry. He developed extensive global experience in operational management, driving enhanced business productivity, and product development across diverse corporate environments. And prior to coming to ChemQuest, of Rose Plastic, Bob's leadership led to improvements in operational performance and efficiency while helping to stabilize employee turnover and morale despite COVID-19 pandemic conditions. A Six Sigma Green Belt, Bob has a passion for mentoring and coaching, team development, continuous improvement, and customer satisfaction. Joining Bob today towards the end of the segment is Pete Smith. As a ChemQuest director, Pete is an active member of the firm's operational and manufacturing efficiencies team. He has extensive global leadership experience in operations and manufacturing management, including lean manufacturing, process development, logistics, and engineering in the chemical, coatings, and adhesives industry. A proven leader with in-depth knowledge of manufacturing and business practices, Pete is mentoring and motivating others to strive for continuous improvement and product improvement opportunities. I know these two gentlemen have a lot to share with us today, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob.
Okay. Thank you. You can go to the next slide, Marcus. Thank you, Heidi, for that introduction. First, I want to just let everybody know that this is the first webinar in a four-part series under our Operational Manufacturing Excellence series with process optimization, overall equipment effectiveness today. And then next month in July, we'll have optimizing plant operations, including design considerations for growth. We'll take a month off in August, follow up in September with optimizing supply chain to increase the bottom line. And then we'll wrap up in October with the last webinar, Safety First, Best Practices in Environmental Health and Safety. Next slide. So for those of you less familiar with ChemQuest, I want to take just a moment to introduce you to our firm. ChemQuest is a global consulting firm serving the specialty chemicals markets. Our expertise lies in navigating the intersection of strategy, markets, operations, and technology through services offered in four pillars: business strategy and transformation, external technology development, operational and manufacturing efficiencies, and M&A advisory services for both buy and sell side. Our team is comprised of 130 plus people strong, and everyone has a minimum of 25 years business experience with ChemQuest or beyond before coming to ChemQuest. Primarily, the background of most people was coming from technical or C-suite level positions. Our team members are former business owners, VPs, R&D, technology, marketing, and operations, and some even in general management. We have been in your shoes and understand the challenge you face on a daily basis. We love our industry, and that's why we chose to continue to support this at this point in our careers. All of our work is protected under NDA, with project and client confidentiality being of the utmost importance. Any technical IP developed belongs to our clients. Next slide. recognizing that what we discussed today, many of you are already probably aware of. A lot of this is pretty basic to people who grew up in the manufacturing sector, but it's my goal today, our goal today, to really try to come up with some new ways and some insights that maybe you haven't looked at using these tools. So, like I said, a lot of it redundant to some of you, but again, let's hope that we can come up with some new insights and ways to do things better. So if we look at the slide, there's really, and for process optimization in OEE, depending on the business model and value creation drivers, operational focus should be prioritized based on results. I mean, that to me is what should be behind why we do this. They typically consist of really 4 different areas. OEE, or overall equipment effectiveness, first time right, FTR, operating costs. They'd be variable, fixed, and sometimes accounting practices will use semi-variable or semi-fixed. And then KPIs, we'll talk about some key performance indicators. Next slide. Overall equipment effectiveness, OEE, is a KPI that compares your operation's ideal performance to its overall real performance. OEE is a quantifiable way to measure how well your equipment, people, and processes are working by measuring availability, performance, and quality. Key to OEE success is the development of a solid baseline. It's very difficult to jump into OEE with getting that baseline, and I would highly recommend you put much energy into that. Before spending too much time on the actual numbers, focus on continuous improvement activities that established from the established baseline. For you long distance runners, a little sports analogy here. Think of the OEE as a journey like a marathon. It's a long run with many obstacles to overcome. The job of the runner is to take many small improvement steps over that course of the race to reduce the final time. That is how to improve your OEE score. Next slide. So, equipment-based productivity loss in manufacturing is caused by several common factors relating to availability, performance, and quality. Using those common losses concept creates a clear path to improving your OEE score. Working to reduce availability, loss of equipment failures, setups, adjustments, protects against preventable unplanned downtime while minimizing your unplanned stops. You want to be addressing performance loss that results from idling and minor stops, as well as reductions in speed, prevents small stops and slow cycles from accumulating. You want to be minimizing quality loss in the form of process defects and lower yield, which reduces the number of unusable products produced during steady production. Let's break down the most common TPM losses or gaps in greater detail. Next slide. So, I'm sorry, Marcus, go back to the past previous slide. Okay, so as we said, there's many different ways that you can improve your TPM losses. Those can be in the form of equipment failure. They can be in the forms of setup and adjustments. They can be unplanned stops. They can be planned stops. Go to the next slide, Marcus. The loss due to equipment failure accounts for any significant period in which equipment is scheduled for production but is not running due to failure. A simple way to relate to equipment failure is any unplanned stoppage or downtime. The common examples of equipment failure are machine breakdowns, improper setup, unplanned maintenance, and from the broader perspective of unplanned stops, additional reasons might include the lack of operators or materials, your process is choked by upstream equipment, and your process might be blocked by downstream equipment. Next slide. Availability loss to setup and adjustments. Setup and adjustments account for any significant period in which equipment is scheduled for production but is not running due to changeover or other adjustments to equipment. Some of the common reasons for setups and adjustments might be product to product equipment modification. It might be related to product changeovers not being optimal, or even maintenance that's unplanned. Production schedulers should target customers' satisfaction as well, meeting on time in full delivery related to production, and efficiency costs where production campaigns are maximized. I think it's important to mention that you want to reach an equilibrium if possible between the service level that you provide to the customer and the costs whenever possible. Next slide. Idling and minor stops account for time when the equipment stops for a short period. It can only be maybe a few minutes or less while the operator resolves an issue. A simpler way to view it is in any small stop leading to performance loss. Some examples of idling and minor stops might be raw material disruptions, plug transfer lines, incorrect operator parameters or work instructions, improper calibrations. I need to locate ancillary equipment that might not be stored in the right place or easily accessible. And it could also be related to design issues. While performance-related issues may appear small in magnitude, they add up when multiple occurrences happen almost simultaneously. Most companies not embedded in a robust continuous improvement culture tend to ignore the potential. For example, it might be only a few minutes. You'll hear that over and over from shop floor. Well, it only took a few minutes. Again, it's about that analogy that I gave previously on the marathon. Little things add up, and those over time with different machines can really make a difference over the course of your production cycle. Next slide. So another factor in performance loss is reduced speed. Sometimes it's called slow cycles. This accounts for time when equipment runs slower than the ideal cycle time. So examples of reduced speed would be you could have poor maintenance, substandard raw materials can be a cause of that, limited ancillary equipment, poor environmental conditions in the plant, and it could be related to operator inexperience or general lack of training for the operators. Related to the operator inexperience or lack of training area, there can also be situations where operators slow down the process knowingly or even unknowingly. This can happen for various reasons. Supervisors, floor shop personnel should take a close eye on making sure they're working to the employees, the operators are working to their full potential and doing what's within their power to stay on track when it comes to not taking unnecessary breaks or what have you. Next slide. So we move to quality, and here process defects can account for defective material produced as off-spec batches or from startup until steady state production is reached. You get to your continuous process. Examples of some process defects that you might be aware of are lot-to-lot raw material variation, incorrect equipment settings, or operator or equipment handling errors. In addition to process defects impacting OE and favorably, the increased inspection that goes as a result of poor quality results in added costs as well as potentially inferior or out-of-spec product reaching the customer. Best to eliminate the defects altogether. It's going to help both your cost situation and it's going to end up being a better product to the end customer in the end. Next slide. So also related to quality loss is the reduced yield accounts for material loss due to poor processing results in suboptimal finished product output. Some examples of reduced yield are suboptimal changeovers, incorrect settings on a new product run, equipment that requires warm-up cycles, or poor operator training. In addition to process, hold on one second. in addition to being a quality loss, depending on the costs associated, yield losses can be quite significant to a company's profitability, especially when you consider today with high inflation we have experienced due to raw materials increasing over the last few years. Yield to me right now even has a higher payback and a higher penalty than it did when before the inflationary period hit. Many of these materials have risen in excess of 30–40%. I think when it's applied, that you can rework your material back into the process by reducing waste, using a first-time right mindset by increasing the first pass yield saves time and hence costs. Taking a best practice approach to first pass yield improvement is the way to go. Let's say, for example, think in terms of the goal of 100% or 1 pound or 1 unit into your process, hoping for a goal of 1 pound, 1 unit out of your process. That would be 100% or basically no yield loss. Well, that's very unrealistic. But what you can do is determine the yield. Once you determine the yield, let's say you're at 90%, but your goal obviously would be to get to 100%. You build a bridge of that 10%, and you say, okay, what are the drivers of that 10% that we're losing our yield losses? Where's that coming from? So you can go after it and improve. Preferably use a Pareto methodology. So in that 10%, I would want to look at what are the most biggest impacts. So you might get a root cause that's 2%. You might get one that's 1%. You might get a couple that are 0.5%. You want to Pareto them based on ease of use, ease of simplification, but also what's going to give you the biggest payback. Next slide. So in summary, what I would say the biggest OEE mistakes, they tend to be the following 6. I'll go through these in a little detail. So you want to focus on the OEE score versus the underlying losses. Also, you want to be using budget or, you don't want to be using budget or standards speeds for ideal cycle time. That budget standard is more of what your run rate has been in your targeted or your budget improvements. It's not what's ideal. Another one is overemphasizing OEE on the shop floor. I think sometimes you can overwhelm the shop floor employees on drilling OEE in their head, focus more on the actual issues themselves and what they have, control over to fix. The next one is a pet peeve of mine where it's collecting too much data. While data collection is great in itself, data collection isn't free. If you're going to collect data that you're not going to use, I would highly recommend, backing it off, at least initially, until you can get the most important ones in, and then you work on continuous improvement and add data on other aspects of the process. Another one would be comparing different processes across locations. Many times you see where you start to compare a plant by plant, but their processes are completely different. For example, one might have more product changeovers. Another plant might have a complexity issue of the materials they're running. It's not right to compare OEE scores when you have really different processes going on. So stay away from, the comparing side. And then excluding changeovers. I think changeover time is lost production time, like it or not. A lot of times people ignore the changeover benefit that they can get by reducing them. I like to think of it as in a race car race, be it a NASCAR or a Formula One, where they go in for a pit stop. They go into the pit stop for a change of tires, and if you've ever watched a race, you can see how fast they can turn them around. Now, I'm not advocating we do things in an unsafe way by doing things quick, but you can see the magnitude of a quick changeover and what it can do on your race results. That's also your performance results in a plant by keeping your lines running and optimal. Next slide. So I wanted to introduce at a kind of a metric that's a fallout of using OEE on the shop floor. One of the visuals recommended across plant shop floors are the TAD dashboards, which is target actual efficiency and downtime. It's important to use clear and achievable metrics for everyone to understand and be engaged in the process, real time. This visual across the plant floor helps the frontline production teams be focused on their activities in real time. Again, think it's similar to a pulse. It's also highly recommended that the metrics not be used to compare or share results by shifts or whatever. It's better to focus on the issues. What's nice about this is when you walk into that shop floor and you see this visual above a line or above, where your scores are kept, it gives you, again, back to the pulse analogy of where you are in the overall process. And it can give you that sense of urgency or lack thereof to what has to happen to get back on track. Next slide. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about costs. So I think I just want to give you a brief education on how operational costs impact, operational performance in manufacturing. So operational costs are an ongoing expense incurred from the normal day-to-day running of a business. They can be categorized as fixed, variable, or semi-variable. Some accounting, policies will refer to them as direct and indirect. I'm not here to give an accounting lesson. We'll let the accountants sort that out. But I think what's important for our discussion today is the key ones. And cost of goods sold is probably the biggest one on the shop floor, where we take in your direct labor of materials, energy, and direct labor, as I said. It's then when you get into more of the overhead categories, being technical, selling, general, administrative, sometimes referred to as TSG&A. Some of them might include rent, equipment, inventory, marketing costs, payroll costs, insurance, R&D. Anything that's considered in that administrative or overhead category typically falls into that. I would just say that typically the companies with a high proportion of variable costs have a much better chance of controlling their costs as a relationship to sales. It's much easier, why it's called variable, is to shift your focus on variable costs and taking them out quickly and in direct proportion to sales than it is fixed. Fixed sometimes is a longer term approach and it may take some sacrifice. The key is never get to a point where you build them up so high in the first place. So those are the really basis of the takeaways for the background for operational costs. Next slide, Chris. So many organizations focus on all or most of their continuous improvement on the manufacturing shop floor, as I've experienced. I think there's an opportunity to leave the non-manufacturing, or what I'll call, the direct manufacturing areas, such as technical, selling, general, administration, as ripe opportunities. Those often get ignored in many companies. So what I would target in the TSG&A area for improvement, those areas would be, standardize your processes, automate wherever possible, use up-to-date information, develop a continuous improvement mindset, not only in the shop floor, but in your, I'll call your administrative and your more technical and, general areas. Look at waste elimination in those areas. Free up resources for more value-added activities. You don't always have to reduce headcount. Sometimes if you free up what I'll call waste in that area, you can shift that workload towards more value-added areas such as customer service or things that are going to impact your top line. And then review all the above annually. That's another thing you really should do, is take a look every year, at least, maybe part of the budget process, however your organization is established, and look at those areas that, because they change, and, new insights, new ideas should come from that. Next slide. So what are the best tools to best manage your TSG&A costs? A lot of companies will use a process called process mapping, where you'll go through from A to Z all the tasks that are being performed within a given area or function. And you're looking for waste, you're looking for redundancies, you're looking for unnecessary steps, and you approach it in trying to take some of that out. Again, reducing hours that can be spent on more, let's say, value-added approaches. Delegation. I mean, that goes without saying. It's important to delegate have the right people performing the right tasks. You don't want your senior people performing what I'll call more mundane or more clerical tasks in an organization. Make sure you're right sizing your organization to the tasks that are being fulfilled. New technology is another example. Software to make your job much easier. There might be some software tools out there that get rid of some of the what I'll call more redundant or lower end work. There's always ways to look at it through that way. And then outsourcing tasks. I think sometimes companies are hesitant to outsource tasks. Be it they look at it as an expense, but there may be some things that are actually more cost effective being done by an outside group where the expertise is there than you trying to reinvent the wheel and do it yourself. I'd say my experience in working with companies and organizations that the TSG&A areas are often neglected or even sometimes even ignored. It's important when committing to continuous improvement that it is done consistently across the entire enterprise. I'll give you an example. I worked in a company where every year we were champion, and this was when I was in a vice president of operations role. The manufacturing team had to continually come up with cost out or productivity. While this was something that was built in our organization, it should be. What we found out is it was purely targeting the manufacturing process. And as we used to say, is the people on the other side of the blue doors, which was the corporate team, really didn't have the same, let's say, accountability in continuous improvement as the shop floor. I would highly recommend, if you really want to take a culture of best practices, you've got to get leadership from top to bottom, and every organization within the company buying into continuous improvement. It's just not for the shop floor or manufacturing. It should be something that everybody signs up for and continues. That's going to help employee morale, especially for those on the floor that they see themselves being targeted maybe as the every year the ones that have to get the as I'll say the blood out of the turnip, if you will, to get some gains. It does have a big impact when the administrative team and others share in that contribution. Next slide. So want to shift now to a concept called FTR, or first time right. First time right is both a manufacturing principle and is a KPI that denotes the percentage of product that is produced within specification. With Origin Six Sigma, first time right it's not about achieving perfection or 100%. Instead, it aims are developing the controls in place, using the right assets, a mindset in place towards perfection using science over art, and a consistency factor. You want to be doing things the same every time, assuming they're the right things. And just a point, remember, Six Sigma allows for 3.4 defects per million transactions. The goal of first time right is to produce all units correctly the first time. That is the goal. How do you do it? You do it by eliminating the need for any rework, reducing waste and operational costs, and optimizing efficiency. Next slide. So how do you calculate an FTR score? Depending on the operational complexity, a total FTR score in the high 90s% would be viewed, if you looked at it from a large sample basis, as excellent. While a score in the high 80s% shows significant room for improvement to be attained. The calculation is pretty simple. It's first time right equal number of units in specification divided by total units or total units produced times 100. That's how you come up with the calculation. So what are some of the FTR manufacturing that can be improved upon to get that higher score? One is standardized operating procedures, more monitoring of your processes. You want to have consistent materials, quality of materials coming in, maintenance, as well as operator training to include feedback. My experience with coming into an organization and observing some of the following behavior. If you're hearing things when you come into an organization such as, we simply rework the waste back into the product. Why rework in the first place would be my question. Tasks done over and over again, where steps can be eliminated. Close enough, or you hear the thing, close, it's close enough, or we're in the ballpark. That will do, et cetera, et cetera. You know, cultures get complacent, and at times they're happy to just, you know, take the way it's always been, or they don't have an understanding what those first time right gains can accomplish to their bottom line. Education's key for management and peers to let people know that those little things add up. Next slide. So let's move to KPIs. Let's say, you know, a lot of what we're talking about are already KPIs, but I want to focus a little more on, you know, how you measure and the tactics used to get visibility. While it's common for companies to develop KPIs, success is not guaranteed. I've seen many organizations have KPIs and they're just not using them in the most beneficial way, or they don't have the right ones. The problems arise when they're trying to establish too many KPIs. They might not be establishing the best or the most productive KPIs. They're not prioritizing KPIs effectively. They treat them all the same. Using ineffective or even inaccurate dashboards that leads to lower productivity. You've got to make sure your dashboards with the KPIs and the metrics are leading to lower productivity. And to do that, you got to put the work up front to make sure that those are the right ones. So on the right side, they're just a 5 of what I would consider fairly typical standard KPIs that many companies use as their base KPIs. Obviously, there are many others that can be used as well, depending on their impact on the performance. But those 5 in the manufacturing world, I would probably say, are right up there in the top, you know, 5 out of 6, 7, 8. So I just show that, and typically in a typical KPI tracking environment, those 5 at a minimum would be used in a manufacturing environment. Next slide. So it's imperative that you create and maintain KPIs that are relative to your business. It's important, and this is something that I think ChemQuest has a good feel for and can help in this respect. You just don't want to go and just put together KPIs based on pulling them off the internet or some kind of you know, copying and paste of what you've seen as the right KPIs. I think the best way to look at it is it's highly recommended keeping your scorecard as simple as possible. Example, one of my previous assignments when I came in, the company was tracking, just in manufacturing, over 80 KPIs. When I asked the question, wow, that's a lot of KPIs, how are you doing against them? There was actually no real good answer. It was only basically, we have all of them, we can give you answers on what the data says, but they really couldn't tell you that it was improving or not. That's a sure sign that there's a lack of focus, and by having too many KPIs, you really want to narrow that down. While tracking them might be a good reason, you got to start there. Little focus on the right KPIs will lead to, again, poor results. The team needs to be driven by tracking performance and addressing the problems rather than tracking the issues. We recognize that we needed a complete overhaul in this organization. So we did a forced ranking of all the KPIs. We shrunk it down to about 8 in total. We put focus in resources in the place where there was the most payback. We did a Pareto based on return and really start shifting the culture away from tracking, analyzing to doing. There wasn't, again, there wasn't that accountability there for results, and we had to change that. So, you know, it could be as simple as training or explaining to the team is what the impact of KPIs can do. That may be just enough to get them fired up and get the organization going in the right direction on their own. But you might have more serious issues within the organization, and you need a more massive culture change driven by accountability management. Next slide. So, in summary, it's important to develop KPI scorecards that have buy-in and have involvement from all the team members as well as senior leadership for best results. I would put these 6 as good targets to improve in your KPI management area. I think the first thing, you've got to establish realistic goals that are attainable so that the team recognizes that we're not just pie in the sky and making numbers that are unrealistic and you just can't achieve them. They'll give up if that's the case. You want your team members need to be respected. The best way I can say is involve them in the scorecard development process. Sometimes your best ideas come from the shop floors. And getting them involved in the process is probably going to give you a higher chance of success because you're going to get their buy-in much easier because you reached out to them and asked them for their input. Team members, though, they need to be held accountable for what they control. You can't have areas within your plant operation where teams are pulling down or individuals are pulling down other members of the team because we're just ignoring the accountability aspect of that. It's important that everybody pull their weight, and you do that through accountability management and making sure that you're giving constant communication on and praise when things are going well. Leadership needs to be involved, interactive in the process by asking questions. When leadership, senior management, whatever, is asking questions to those responsible, they're going to get more attention. They're going to get more results because people know you're looking at it. So you want to be engaged in the scorecard review process too. My recommendation, what I've done is I would have a monthly review where the teams responsible for the KPIs would deliver not only a report, but actually do a presentation on their progress. And you could have a good two-way exchange back and forth between management, leadership, and those responsible in the shop floor. I think the team members need to be informed, educated regarding how improvements or the lack thereof have an impact on the business. And that could come out in that meetings segment that I mentioned, where you have the leadership team give feedback and have an exchange. And again, the key is to keep it as positive as possible to drive that motivation within the team itself. And then this is something that I would highly recommend depending upon the culture. The last one, that would be you want to be able to show the results and validate them by a third party. Whether that's if you don't have it, I used to use the accounting or the controlling department to do that. It was a good way to get them involved in what we were doing, but it also carried a lot of weight when it assured accuracy through them auditing the figures, and it gave us a lot more credibility with senior management because you want to be able, especially where it's applicable, to take it back to the P&L or even the balance sheet if there's some improvements made. And if you can do that, you're going to surely get the what I'll call the interest level and really the commitment and resources you want coming back at you from senior management. So those are what I would consider the best way to tackle a KPI scorecard and a process for continuous improvement. So with that, next slide. That concludes the presentation, and I think we have some time. It looks like here we got about 20 minutes to take a few questions. Yep, Marcus, any questions come in during the presentation?
Yep, thanks, Bob. We'll go ahead and move to the Q&A. Okay. How do you recommend reducing fear inside an organization that is concerned about potential job losses due to gaining productivity?
I'm going to let Pete also answer this, but let me just give you my take on that. I think the key is you've got to be in this for the long haul, and you've got to show to eliminate or reduce that fear. You don't want to have work being reduced and then going through job elimination or work elimination. In this day and age where it's so tough to get good people and keep them on your payroll and in those skill sets, you want to keep them engaged and reward them with job continuity and even maybe some type of an incentive for what they're doing, rather than say, well, we created productivity by taking work out, therefore we get rid of people. Pete, I don't know what your experience, but that would be one way I would look at it.
And I agree with that, Bob. I mean, my experience has been that first off, being very open and upfront with as management to the employees and let them know what you're working on, what you're trying to prove. Let them know that it's not going to be something that you're trying to cut heads. Because quite frankly, labor is not one of your major costs. I mean, it is a cost and something you've got to be control and be aware of, but efficiencies relative to yield improvements and relative to customer growth, relative to inventory control, those things are all far, far bigger impact on your bottom line than the direct labor or labor portion of it. So you've got to be upfront. You let them know that if there are any labor reductions or any headcount reductions, you'll try and work them through attrition rather than through actual forced reduction. And again, it's a gradual process. You let it happen, and you make sure that people feel engaged, that they're part of the process, and they feel they can have an impact that's going to help them.
All right, we'll jump to the next one. You discussed yield improvements as a high potential productivity target. What would be the best way to initiate and drive a process for improvement?
So I'll go back to what I said during the presentation and maybe add a little bit to that, and I want Pete to comment as well. But what I'd like to see is, back to building that bridge of what your current yield is versus what at 100%. And take that, and once you have that bridge built of what the key drivers are in the yield loss aspect, so we'll go back to the 10% loss comparison. Targets, what are the drivers that you're losing? Is it shrinkage? The product's going up in the air? Is it you're making bad parts? Is it your startups are creating waste? All of them, start to rank them and start putting action plans to go after them and drive that improvement, because it can be a very, very big number. Some of these companies are running their material costs are as high as, I've seen it as high as 70% of the total cost of a company, and almost more 85, 90% of the cost of goods sold. So a 1%, 2% impact on yield gain can almost be a 1% of overall cost. So that's how I would go about it. Pete, you might have some different insights more related to the industry that you might have.
No, I think you're correct, Bob. The real impact there and the thing to be concerned to be focused on is, as you pointed out, inventory losses, yield losses really fall directly to the bottom line. They are material, they're costs you're already putting into the product that you're not getting value out of, and you need to understand where they come from. And in some cases, it may be because you have a poor metering system that's feeding raw materials into your process. It may be because you have a poor transport system where you're handling bags and they get damaged on the way there or to the process. There are a number of places that can happen. It can even be, and it can be related to where you rotate your inventory, and that you leave the old material sitting back and never really get it used into your process. So there's a number of things that drive into this. You can't just take a straight, simple approach. You need to do, like Bob pointed out, you look at your yield, your losses, try to understand where they are, try to estimate where you think they're where the loss is occurring. Many times, particularly in the coatings industry, the losses are in the air. They are throwing material together or creating a batch, I should say, in an open top tank. It gets mixed at high speed. There's some air loss there. It may take a while for it to get tinted or brought into the proper color match. And that time frame that is sitting there exposed is all losses that can occur that you can't get back. And you're really just putting the money into it and losing it directly.
Just to make one more comment to come out of what you said, Pete, is if I put my general manager hat on for a second and think in terms of, let's say we're in this inflationary period like we are now and have been in, and you're getting this increase in raw materials. Well, you know, the argument could be, well, you're going to pass along the price increase of your raw materials anyway. All you're going to do is stay whole or stay whole with your margins you had before. Think of how beneficial it would be if you can get both. You get the price increase for the raw materials going up, but you put it in your bottom line because you took waste out of the process. So that's a double hit that you get that some people may not be thinking about.
Well, and I think the point there is that price increases, from my experience, have always lagged what the raw material increases. So any price increase you get is always a month to 2 to 3 months behind the raw material increases you're getting. That's money you've lost in that time frame, and you really can't get back.
Very good. Yeah. Good.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. We'll move to the next one. Based on the complexity of OEE, what type of IT support is common, and how do you recommend choosing the best platform?
So I think, you know, there's no one perfect answer to this. It's going to depend. And let me give you some examples. If you know, if you're part of a very large organization, let's say, and you have a pretty robust IT department, if your business is very, let's say, customized or specialty, you might want to have your IT department develop something in-house, maybe a hybrid approach of what they do along with some, let's say, ancillary software packages. But what I've experienced in most, what I'll say, small, mid-sized companies, they would typically go outside. There's several OEE software packages available in the marketplace targeting specific industries. I would recommend you'd want to go through an evaluation of what's best for you and what's best for your company. This is something that ChemQuest can help with as well, in evaluation based on our experience in different industries on what's the best, you know, software platform to give you the best results. But that's how I would answer it. Pete, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would say that first off, most of our clients, when we start with them, and the larger ones, of course, measure OEE, but many of the smaller ones do not. And when we talk about OEE, they go, well, we compare it to what we've been doing, excuse me, compared to our capacity. We always compare it to our capacity, but that's not the same thing. And you can't read it that way. It is truly, sorry. Sorry about that. Anyway, it truly is a separate entity that you need to focus on and take a look at. And you don't necessarily have to start out using software. It does not have to be a dedicated program specifically to OEE. Starting out as simple as using an Excel spreadsheet or developing some data points and get your baseline. And the more you get to your baseline, the more you can then begin to develop what kind of improvements you can look at and where they can come from. Going back to that, and it's something Bob pointed out, and I think it's going to be an underlying thing through this whole process, and that is get employee involvement. Make sure the employees understand that they're part of the process. Make sure they understand that they can have an impact in it. Make sure that they are part of the go forward.
All right, thanks. Next one. We spend most of our cost out efforts on the shop floor and rarely go upstream into the TSG&A areas. How would you recommend going upstream to start a continuous improvement initiative that garners management attention?
So, I discussed that a little bit during the presentation. I think the best way to do it is, you know, you've got to get management support to go into those areas and try to develop some of the continuous improvement efforts in the what I'll call the TSG&A areas, because a lot of times, as I mentioned before, management's in that group, and a lot of management's hesitant to go into what I'll call some of the more stable, or not stable, maybe not the right word, but the more typical areas that don't get touched, as I'll say. They're kind of sacred cows, as we used to say in the industry, that you can't go there. So you got to break down those barriers with senior management first. Depending on your situation, you may have the talent in-house doing some process mapping within the TSG&A area, but it might be worthwhile to go outside and bring some outside expertise in that knows how to look at those types of what I'll call buried treasures and opportunities in the administrative side. One company I was with, we were large enough that we could afford to bring in what I'll call a Six Sigma black belt who came actually from the banking industry and was a specialist in administration. And this person did nothing but develop Six Sigma black belt projects in the TSG&A area. Not everybody has that luxury, but it's an option to consider. And you might want to develop one of your black belts, or develop a black belt or green belt in your organization that focuses on those types of things, working in conjunction with the management team. Again, it comes back to management support for that and the commitment to do it. So that's kind of how I would probably best answer that. Pete, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, my comments would go along the lines that many times, the focus is on operations. That's where the costs are, and they really do ignore the cost by the support areas. And I guess where I can point to that is, as an example, in customer service, we've done projects with the customer service group in looking at how they can make improvements. And what that's really led to is reduction in time from material shipping out of the site. It resulted in time where customer service and how they would have to process orders and how it would get to the plant and those kinds of things. And a day or two lost in today's industry is very significant. In addition, the other spot it helped was in customer questions, because the customer will call to see where their order is, or they'll call to find out if it can be moved up. And delays there are also critical to trying to customer satisfaction. So it really is about looking at the support systems that lead to the plant or to the manufacturing, and those systems and improvements you can make there all help things move forward overall.
All right, thanks. And that's it for the questions at the moment. I want to give Heidi a chance to chime in. Did you have anything, Heidi?
Thanks, Marcus. The question that I have, Bob and Pete, is maybe more fundamental. All of the discussion that you've had on this issue seems to be so dependent on communication. I guess I'm wondering how often are there employee meetings? Are they scheduled on a regular basis? Is it your safety staff? How do you manage the communication in order to achieve goals?
I'll start, and Pete, I'm going to let you finish this question up. So for me, it comes down to Heidi. It's about the leadership and the culture that they're establishing. You've got to get engaged from shop floor to the CEO level, and you really want a complete organization that is embedded into the culture, and everybody's on the same page. It's not easy to do in organizations that are very hierarchical and top down, where, I hate to say it, you get a lot of organizations, it's kind of like the glass ceiling doesn't get down into the shop floor level. But it's so critical what you said, and really it's just commitment, that you're scheduling things, and you're serious about making sure that those meetings are held, that communications, having open forums with people on the floor. This has got to just be driven from the leadership side. and preferably formally, but for sure also informally. That's the best answer I can give you. Pete, you might have some other observations to that as well.
I basically agree, Bob. I mean, it's easy to sit here and say, well, there should be monthly, or they should be weekly, or they should be bi-monthly, or whatever frame you set up. You really have to understand what the organization can support and what is right for the organization to support. But the other point that's really important is that interaction that's informal as well. That you go out on the floor, you walk through, you talk to people. I've been in plants and managed plants and became the subsequent manager of a plant. That when I toured the plant initially, every time the plant manager walked through and walked by, you'd see basically all you saw was the top of people's heads. They weren't engaging the manager, and the manager wasn't engaging them for whatever reason. And I'm not judging that. I'm just saying that that's an important thing you see, and you've got to take that and turn that around. Interaction between employees and management and including upper management is a critical path. And it also is critical that the VP of operations or the head of the operation or the head of the organization go to each facility and spend some time and be engaged with the management, with the whole team there. Employees need to feel that they're part of the company and that they make a difference. And the fact is, they do. They're critical to it, they're important to it, and they're the support that makes everything happen.
Well, thank you. That's helpful.
All right. And did you have something else, Heidi?
No.
Oh, okay. So that's all the Q&A we have. So we want to thank Bob Kramer and Pete Smith for spending this time with our members this afternoon. And I also want to reiterate a couple of the upcoming ChemQuest webinars that Bob spoke about earlier. On July the 13th, we'll have More Than Just Wood. Low temp cure technology opens up a world of new substrates for powder coatings. And on July the 18th, we'll have Optimizing Plant Operations, including design considerations for growth. And both of those are at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And slides from today's presentation will be distributed this afternoon, and the recording will be available on paint.org as early as tomorrow. And with that, we'll wrap up. And,
Marcus, one thing in addition, if people have any questions, they're more than welcome to send them to Bob or I, and we will certainly do our best to get an answer back to them. If they think of questions afterwards or watching the presentation they have, something comes up, we are very, very open to be supportive to that.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Pete. I forgot to click to that last slide earlier during the presentation, but that will be included along with the slides that are distributed this afternoon. All right. All right.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye now.